Authoritarianism, suspicion of the West, and aggression. Three traits that seem to define Russia today. But are these uniquely modern, or do they echo centuries of Russian history? From the autocratic rule of the Tsars to the ideological clashes of the Soviet Union and the calculated moves of Vladimir Putin, Russia's actions have long shaped and been shaped by its complex identity. In this episode of Raw History, we'll explore how these themes have evolved over the centuries. Is Russia's behaviour today a continuation of its past, or is it forging an entirely new path? If you find this video interesting or gain value from my work, then please consider subscribing to support the channel and stay updated on future content. Under Vladimir Putin, Russia has become synonymous with centralized power. Political opposition is stifled, media is tightly controlled, and dissent is punished. Alexei Navalny's imprisonment and the suppression of protests against the war in Ukraine are just a few examples of how the Kremlin continues to maintain a tight grip on power. Authoritarianism, however, has a deep root in Russian history. Ivan the Terrible, the first Tsar of Russia between 1547 and 1584, used the oprichnina, a state policy of terror designed to suppress the boyar nobility and consolidate power. He created an autocratic system where the Tsar's authority was absolute. Later, Peter the Great, between 1682 and 1725, centralized power even further, enforcing sweeping reforms to modernize Russia. He famously executed his own son to eliminate a potential rival. During the Soviet era, Stalin's regime brought authoritarianism to a new extreme. The Great Purge of 1930 saw millions executed or sent to the gulags as Stalin used terror to eliminate opposition and consolidate control. Propaganda and censorship ensured that no dissenting voices could gain traction. Stalin once remarked, "I trust no one, not even myself," encapsulating the paranoia that drove his rule. From the Tsars to the Soviets to Putin, centralized power has always remained a constant in Russia. Leaders often justify authoritarian control as necessary for maintaining stability in such a vast and diverse country. What's different today, though, is the use of modern tools like surveillance technology, state-controlled media, and legal mechanisms to suppress dissent. While Ivan relied on physical terror and Stalin on his purges, Putin uses disinformation and the law to silence critics. A Russian proverb says, "The Tsar is far away, but God is near." This reflects how centralized authority has long been accepted in Russian life, whether in the form of a Tsar, a general secretary, or a president. Suspicion of the West. Russia's relationship with the West is defined by mistrust. NATO's expansion into Eastern Europe is framed as a direct threat to Russian sovereignty. In his 2007 Munich speech, Putin declared, "We have every reason to believe that NATO's expansion represents a serious provocation." This suspicion is reinforced by state media narratives that portray Western nations as morally corrupt and intent on destabilizing Russia. Suspicion of the West, though, has a long history in Russia. The Mongol invasions in the 13th century isolated the country from the cultural developments of the Renaissance and Enlightenment, creating a cultural and political divide with the rest of Europe. By the 19th century, Russia was seen as the Eastern giant, feared by Western powers for its size, ambitions, and disconnected nature from the rest of Europe. The Crimean War exemplified this tension. Western alliances opposed to Russia's attempt to dominate the Ottoman Empire, reinforcing Russian perceptions of Western hostility. And during the Cold War, the Soviet Union viewed NATO as its ideological and geopolitical rival. Proxy wars in Vietnam, Korea, and Afghanistan became battlegrounds for this rivalry. The perception of Western alliances as threats is a recurring theme in Russian history. From Napoleon's invasion in 1812 to NATO's post-Cold War expansion, Russia has historically viewed Western coalitions as an existential danger. However, while Tsarist Russia and the Soviet Union often reacted defensively to Western aggression, modern Russia under Putin employs a more proactive strategy. Disinformation campaigns, cyber attacks, and election interference are examples of how Russia undermines Western unity today. Napoleon once called Russia a power that marches to its own drumbeat. This independence and suspicion of Western norms remained a hallmark of Russian geopolitics. Aggression and expansionism. Russia's actions in Ukraine, from the annexation of Crimea in 2014 to the full-scale invasion in 2022, exemplify its aggressive pursuit of regional dominance. The Kremlin frames these actions as necessary to protect ethnic Russians and counter NATO influence in former Soviet states. Territorial expansion has long been central to Russian history. Under Catherine the Great, Russia annexed Crimea in 1783, securing access to the Black Sea. The Tsars expanded eastwards into Siberia and southward into Central Asia, creating a vast multi-ethnic empire. During the Soviet era, Eastern Europe became a buffer zone under Soviet control, with countries like Poland and East Germany forced into the Warsaw Pact to shield the USSR from the West. Russia's geographic insecurity drives much of its aggression. Without natural borders, Russian leaders have historically sought to create buffer zones to protect the core of its state. This logic underpinned Catherine's annexations, Stalin's occupation of Eastern Europe, and Putin's actions in Ukraine. What's different today is how aggression is executed. Modern Russia's aggression is less about outright control and more about influence. Hybrid warfare, combining military action with cyber attacks, disinformation, and economic coercion, allows Russia to destabilize its neighbours without fully absorbing them. To quote Catherine the Great, "I have no way to defend my borders but to extend them." This mindset underpins both historical and modern Russian expansionism. Was Russia always like this? Authoritarianism, suspicion of the West, and aggression, these traits aren't new in Russia. From the Tsars to the Soviets to Putin, they've shaped the country's politics and identity for centuries. But where the themes remain consistent, the methods have evolved. Where Ivan the Terrible used terror, Putin uses cyber warfare. Where Catherine expanded the empire, Putin exerts influence through hybrid tactics. And where the Soviet Union sought global dominance, Putin's Russia focuses on regional power. Understanding these patterns helps explain, though not justify, modern Russia's actions. As history shows, Russia's behaviour is shaped not just by its leaders, but by its geography, culture, and historical experience. What remains to be seen is whether these traits are immutable, or if Russia can one day forge a new path. What do you think? Are Russia's current actions a continuation of its past, or is Putin forging something entirely new? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more deep dives into history and its politics.